Blessed Lord, who has caused all holy scriptures to be written for our learning, grant that we may so hear them, read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest them, that by patience and comfort of your holy word we may embrace and ever hold fast the blessed hope of everlasting life through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. So Jesus continues his ministry now in teaching of life in the kingdom in the Gospel of Matthew. And we make a shift here that after the teaching of forgiveness in Matthew 18, which we've covered extensively in the steps of church discipline and in the parable of the unforgiving servant, when we understand the magnitude of God's forgiveness for us, how he's wiped out our debt, we then come to this place where it says, it came to pass when Jesus had finished these sayings. Now, it indicates there that Jesus was ending these sayings, which are really, in the Greek, it's very interesting. It's the logos. He ended his words. In other words, sayings is the literal Greek word there is logos, which means he's just giving us words, is what he's giving. But that's what theology is, isn't it? What is theology? Theologos, right? What is theology? Why is it so good? Theologos. What is theology? God, word. It's just words about God. That's what it is, right? Words about God. Words about God. That's theology. Nothing really fancy. You know what's interesting? We come up with these big terms. Like, what are some big terms? Theology. Justification. Sanctification, right? Things like that. But these sound like complicated words, but they're really not when you break them down. And I find this fascinating. If you can break these words down, they become a whole lot more meaningful to us, understandable, versus something that's kind of foreboding and big and out there. So what sayings were these that Jesus had said? Well, you go back and you look at what he had said previously. Context is king. Always go back, look at what he had done. And there, the words that he spoke were what? Well, it was about life in the kingdom, offenses, dealing with a sinning brother, forgiveness of sins. He departs from Galilee, because that's basically his home region there, and he goes to the region of Judea beyond the Jordan. And you can look on your map and see that area there that he was working in. And he's very popular at this point. How do we know that? Verse 2 says, great multitudes followed him. And there's something significant when the great multitudes came. What were they mainly after? Why did they follow Jesus? What was his attraction?
Healing, probably.
In this case, it's healing. And how many of you need healing today? The question is, who doesn't? Right? No, that's just a fact of life. That if you look at the ministry of Jesus, it was to sick people, essentially, correct? It was to sick people. And people are sick. We look at the ministry of Jesus. Who did he heal? And I haven't done a real detailed breakdown of this, but I'd like to sometime, and just make it analogous to what we have today. So what are the sicknesses today? Well, you have orthopedic conditions, right? Joint conditions. What else do you have? You have circulatory problems, cardiovascular issues, correct? You have what else? Cancer issues, okay? And what?
Eyes.
Vision. So Jesus actually dealt a lot with vision, didn't he? Yeah, he did. He dealt a lot with vision issues, so we know it existed back then. And so this ministry took place caring for the sick people. Now, why did he care so much about the sick people? I thought Jesus came to give us everlasting life. I thought he came to forgive our sins. I thought he was interested in spiritual things, right? Was Jesus spiritual or was he physical?
Yes.
Trick question, right? Because it's the incarnation and he came to deal with both issues. By the way, if you think about this, Easter is the greatest emphasis upon the physical, isn't it? Because it's what? The resurrection of the body. The resurrection of the body, which is confessed in the creed. How does it go? I believe in the resurrection of the body and the life everlasting. You have to be raised in order to have eternal life. You don't have eternal life unless you're raised from the dead, because the body and the soul always go together. So at any rate, that's an interesting aspect of the whole physical nature of the ministry of Jesus. It also tells us that great multitudes followed him, and this is across the Jordan River. Crowds, okloi in the Greek means these were crowds of people, hundreds of people, thousands of people, and he healed them there. So the same condition exists today in our world. People need healing in their bodies. And so we can see that an opportunity for the church is to provide help to the body. Help not just to the soul, but also to the body. And if you go into the New Testament, you're going to see a lot of emphasis on that, correct? So we installed officers of the congregation last Sunday, and those officers have a duty to assist the pastor. Because the greatest work, and did you catch that in the vows that some of you made? It's your responsibility to see that the gospel is preached, right? That's the gospel is preached. That's why we exist as a congregation. But in order to do that, we need physical help. So the early church in Acts 6 appointed deacons, and one of the deacons was Stephen. He didn't last long, did he? Because he preached Christ. And so the deacons, the diaconal service was to do what? To care for the body. Particularly to help the widows, the ministry of the widows. And that's a whole big ministry too, by the way. Okay, you've heard me, I sound like a broken record, but I think in many ways the church has neglected the ministry to widows. Okay? And we have a ton of widows in the Christian church, don't we? They had a ton of widows back then too, because men don't live long. Men do not live statistically as long as women. And that's another story. You know, it's a big topic. It's a huge topic. There are so many needs with that: emotional, spiritual, physical aspect of a ministry to widows in the congregation, and widowers as well, we might say too, because the whole aspect of a man and grief is a big aspect, again, that I think is, somewhat overlooked as well. And it's interesting, too. I was thinking about this the other day. When somebody dies and somebody suffers grief, we give them all this attention, don't we? 100 people show up at the funeral. And you get a ton of cards, right?
And then they're gone.
And then they're gone. So, this is interesting. So, recently, actually, when I've sat with families and we plan funerals out, the mortuary always asks, well, we can provide the guest book and everything. The family's going, do we need a guest book? I said, you don't need a guest book. What's the purpose of a guest book at a funeral? Think about it. It creates a bottleneck in the narthex. I never understood that. What do you need a guest book for? What are you going to do with that guest book? Throw it away.
It's going to be thrown.
So Newton Bracewell now says, the pastor says, we don't really need that. They charge you $30 for a guest book, okay? I said, you don't need a guest book. I said, what difference does it make, What is it? You taking a census,
You would contact them and see if they need prayer or encourage
No, there's no reason to. There's no reason to. So anyways, there's no reason to. Why do you have a guest book at, a wedding or something like that? Well, you know what? You know who was at the wedding because you got all the pictures, you got the video and everything anyways, okay? So, by the way, the guest books are not very accurate because many people do not sign them. But my point being, when it comes to grief and loss, we throw a lot of attention on initially, don't we? But then, a week or two later, the bereaved is left to suffer on their own. And there's no contact. Okay? Now, I've heard about this. I've heard this complaint, okay? And every pastor's heard this too, that, if my wife died or my husband died, the pastor never contacted me, never talked to me, and never provided grief counseling. You'll hear that, okay? So that's imperative for the pastor to do some follow-up on that, to talk to people about grief. Now, some people don't want it. You have to understand this, okay? They don't want it. And some people say, I appreciate the thought, Pastor, but I'm okay. Well, I think to myself, you're not okay, but you're just telling me that, okay? And that's okay, because I'll still pray for you, okay? But if you ever want to talk or you want to deal with this issue, some people just, everybody grieves in their own way. You know that? Nobody grieves in the same manner. Some people grieve collectively. They just grieve with others, and they show it. Others hide it. They'll only do it privately. But if you think about that in the Bible, too, that whole aspect of grief ministry, of helping people, there's a whole aspect, I'm convinced of this in the church, too, that we should have a board of elderly. Because we have a board of youth. Now, why do we have a board of youth? Because youth have particular needs, or certain things that they are, part and parcel of. But I thought to myself, we don't have a board of elderly people, do we? We don't have a board of old people, right? Well, we already got that, whatever it is. But I'm thinking that's a whole unique thing in recent years, I found myself involved, and I just had one recently too, of a church member who was scammed. Okay? So I become Pastor Scam Master. Okay? And I have to help this person, and you're talking a lot of money here. Okay? I'm serious about this. And this is increasing with our elderly members who are being scammed. All right? So you deal with that aspect of it too. So there's a lot of, what I'm saying, in the Christian life, there's a lot of physical stuff that goes on here. And I could rattle down the list. What else? People who are drug addicted. Okay? People who have an alcohol problem. People who have a sexual addiction. People who have a gambling problem. Huge problem. You know why? Gamblers Anonymous? Because of the internet now. It makes it available. So easy to go out and do that thing. Legal issues. It just keeps going. The physical stuff of this world. Okay? You know what? I've concluded. This world is very complex. It's very complex. It's not easy, and it's not getting easier. Okay? You ever tried to fill out an income tax form? A 1040? It's just an example where the government doesn't make this easy, is the bottom line. Okay? You ever talk to people who are deliberating whether to take Social Security or not? Well, if you wait this, I said, only the government could complicate something that's so simple. Okay? You think about this, the complexities of that. What are some of these other things? Well, people have issues with, one of the big things I'm finding now too is just home care, medical care. Okay, as people age, huge problem, huge issue. Who takes care of me? Well, I think the church should take you. I have people tell me, I think your church member should go by and help so-and-so out. Okay? Or the children say, Pastor, can the people from the church go by and visit? Well, that's fine and good, but I find many times where children want to renege on their responsibility to care for their parents, and they dump it on the church. And they say, you should do this. You should shuttle them around and take them to medical appointments and do these kind of things and, this type of thing too. So anyway, what I'm getting at, if you look at the ministry of Jesus, now you can look at Jesus' day. Was it easier then? Was it simpler than our day and age? The same human nature, but maybe the complexities definitely, weren't there quite as much.
They didn't have as many attorneys.
You didn't have attorneys dealing with things as much. You did have attorneys because you had the rulers, and, the Pharisees and the scribes and those who would adjudicate situations. But you definitely didn't have the complexities of things that we have today. Well, if you read the New Testament, and it was interesting, I was talking to Soraya yesterday. She's a new worker at Newton Bracewell. She's just starting out. She's in a 2-year program to become a licensed embalmer. And I said, I better treat you well. You might be taking care of me one day, Soraya. Anyways, she was telling me, we were talking about this thing. She said, it's a 2-year program at American River College. Because the San Francisco Mortuary College closed down, right? So the only one in Northern California is at American River. 2-year program. And she used to pick my brain a little bit that we were talking about funeral practices. And they learned the history of funerals. And the practices of Christians, of Hindus, of Muslims. And they learned these customs. And she was telling me about this, and I knew this. She says, I was reading about this. She said, it used to be that churches had their own graveyards. They had their own cemeteries. They didn't go anyplace else. They buried him right out here in the courtyard. See that grave over there next to that tree? That's Mr. Schmidt, who was buried 60 years ago. Okay? By the way, I'm not a proponent of this, but Faith Lutheran is burying their dead now in niches, cremated remains. Faith Lutheran is doing this.
On their property?
Yeah, they're burying on their property now. Yeah, they've got a niche there. So anyways, we were talking about that, and I said the other thing about the church, too, they didn't use mortuaries. They took care of the blessed dead. They washed their bodies, they anointed them, they wrapped them, they dressed them, and they laid them to rest. They just kind of did all this. So we were talking about this shift as America detached from the church. We started building places called funeral homes, whatever that means. Why do they call them funeral homes? It's a goofy name. That's what we call them, right? But then they started building, now this one doesn't look like it at New Bracewell. Well, the only one that looks like it's called Bidwell Chapel. That's interesting. They call it a chapel. But they would build these. I remember in Southern California, they looked like churches. They looked like churches. They had spires, and they looked more like churches than some churches did because they were trying to emulate that, and emphasize that too. So when Jesus was dealing with the people here, he took care of them, he healed them, They didn't have to go to Enloe Medical Center, but Jesus provided this healing. And when Jesus healed people, it was interesting. How did he typically heal people, according to the Word of God? Matthew just tells us that he healed them here. But in what manner did he actually do that? By the way, do you want to know what the word in Greek is for healing? You're going to love this one. You know what the Greek word for healing is? Therapeuo. Therapeuo. Right? Isn't that interesting? Now, where have you heard that word before? That's the Greek word for healing. When it says he healed them, he therapeuoed them. He therapied them. That's what it really means. Yeah. I need therapy. You know what you need? You know what therapy is? I need healing. That's what therapy is. It's healing, okay? So you had a therapeutic encounter. That's to provide healing, okay? And that's how Jesus did this. And he did this most often with the Word. He spoke the Word, but there was a physical element with this as well, with regard to the healing. And that's why James tells us the elders were to anoint the sick with oil. There was a physical element associated with it, laying on of hands or something of that nature. Pat?
When we were in Matthew 11, we talked about this, how Jesus says to come to him because his yoke is easy. But he said that you will get rest for your soul.
Yes.
And so much of our problem today, physically, comes from the stress, the cortisol levels of most people sky high today, and causing that. If we're getting rest for our soul from Jesus, our physical body's going to be a whole lot better.
And that's connected to immunology,
Yes.
resistance to disease.
Yes.
All of the above, really. Now, the Seventh-day Adventists are onto something in this regard, are they not?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And they've been onto this for a lot of years, okay? The integration of body and soul. I really miss Feather River Hospital in Paradise because they roll out the red carpet for Christians. I mean, they obviously have Bible verses on the corridor walls. I haven't been to Mercy Medical Center in Reading recently, but I love going into a Roman Catholic hospital because they have a statue of Jesus and a statue of his mother, and they have crucifixes in all the rooms. Okay? And it's very comforting. It integrates that whole thing together, too. So you're right, he provides rest for our souls, but the soul is part of the body. It's the psyche, right? The soul, remember, never forget this, your soul is, in the Greek word, it's psyche, right? So, and I think we can't discount that because that is connected to the body, which is what? In the Greek, the word for body is soma, right? Okay? And we derive a compound word from that called what? Psychosomatic. Correct? Is that what you're getting at then? Psychosomatic? That what happens to the soul then affects the body. And, vice versa. It all goes together.
Therapy.
Yeah, and going back to therapeuo too, if you look at this healing that Jesus provided, it was definitely for the body, for sure, okay? But it was never apart from the soul. It was always integrated, okay? Always integrated. And I think that's kind of what I'm getting at in the church, how if you look at the New Testament, it's very clear that it was the preaching of the gospel, the administration of the sacraments. If you want to call it the spiritual, okay? I don't like that term so much because I think it's misleading, okay? Because even that is not spiritual. It's actually physical, isn't it? Sacraments are physical. The ministry is physical. You have a physical pastor in the flesh, don't you? You have somebody speaking to you. Everything going on in this class right now is very physical, isn't it? It's voice, it's articulation, it's pronunciation, it's airwaves. Can you feel those waves coming at you? What's the frequency? See, you look at that, right? So if I'm talking like this, it's going to be a very low frequency. If I'm talking like this, it's going to be a higher frequency. But it's going to be, what I'm saying is there's a physical dimension to that, correct? And that's what Christ was doing. So when we get to this healing and this ministry that's going on here, he's very popular, he's healing them there. Well, here we go. Wherever Jesus is, you have a conflict, right? What did Luther say about that? Wherever you set up a Christian church, you can be sure the devil's building a chapel next door. Something to that effect, I'll pull that one out. But he was onto something, so whenever there's a pastor in that pulpit, and whenever there's a pastor teaching here, and whenever you're assembled out there in the pew, you can be sure that Satan will also be there, okay? Because it is his duty to fight against Jesus and fight against the church. All right? Now you can say, well, this is this government fighting against us right now. And I have no doubt about that, by the way. The left is godless. The left is atheistic. The left does not believe in the sanctity of marriage. It does not believe in the sanctity of life. And we as Christians need to say that and double down on that. Because we see exactly what, this is not about President Trump, okay? But this is what we're facing really now about some very foundational beliefs and core values that we're seeing fought against. And Satan will co-opt any movement, whatever he can, of course, to destroy these things. And I'm going to tell you this too, I can see this coming. This is about the preaching from the pulpit in America. This is about my free speech, not but pastors, okay? Because I'm not going to be around long, okay? But the next pastor, whoever it might be, okay, whatever this is in life, there's always going to be another generation to think about this, okay? But it's not, I don't think we can center on ourselves. I have a lot of people who are very concerned, not about themselves, okay? Because if they died right now and went to be with Christ, it'd be fine. And maybe most of you believe that, right? But they're concerned about their children, their grandchildren, on whether they will have the pure gospel of Jesus Christ because of what's happening in this world, okay? And I'm thinking about this and what we're facing. Anybody who preaches this and does this in a public way is marked now, and we're seeing this. Okay, so that's the kind of world we're living in, where this attack is going to come down on the preaching of the gospel. And in Jesus' day, the threats came from the Pharisees. And by the way, I think about this too. That if these threats come, where will they come? Well, can they come from the government? You read the book of Acts. Yes, very apparent. Okay? Very apparent. But if you read the book of Acts, most of it came from the unbelieving Jews, didn't it? Okay? It came from the church, as it were. And then you think about the early Christian church and all those Christological heresies and issues they dealt with. There was the persecution within the church itself. Okay, go to the medieval times. Now, I'm doing what I don't like to do, but I'm going to fast forward to Luther's time. Okay? Where was Luther's opposition? Well, it was essentially from the church. Okay? Now, church and state were one then, no doubt. Okay? And then you fast forward even to our time right now, and I've thought about this too. In the church, if there's a faithful church, a faithful pastor, can he really count on the church leaders supporting him if he's going to be faithful? And I say no. I don't think you can count on that in the LCMS. You might have some pockets who will support you, but you can't always count on that. Now, that's part of the reality, okay? Because I have people tell me, well, we have a district president, we have a synod president. I say, well, so what? We're basically on our own. You know that? I've told pastors this all the time. You're on your own. And they'll hang you out to dry because they're not going to back you up, okay? They're just not going to do this. Pastor Roberts, am I off base on this? For the most part. For the most part.
We have a church in our circuit that has been contrary to our Constitution for almost 2 years or longer, and the Synod has done nothing about it.
But you know who the troublemakers are? The pastors who call attention to this.
Yeah. We get the problem.
Yeah, we are the problem because we're not team players. We're not cooperative. And because I read these ratings, okay? If you looked at my rating, how the district president has rated me, look at Pastor Roberts, and you can see these things. And I got a note the other day from one of my pastor friends who wrote to me and said, he says, I really don't care what your district president says about you. I think you're a faithful pastor. And I said, well, he writes some glowing things about me, but you get that second paragraph and it says, but, right? The old but, B-U-T, the conditional type of things too.
We're out of the mainstream.
Out of the mainstream, part of the narrow band on the right.
That's it, yeah.
The narrow band on the right, or whatever it might be. So you have to take a lot of these things and understand that with Jesus, the Pharisees came. Now again, Pharisees were who? They were the Jews. They were a sect. There were a lot of sects of Judaism. You had Pharisees, Sadducees, you had you had the Essenes, you had the Herodians, and you have all these different groups that are out there. Well, the same thing exists in churches even today when we find this. But they came for what purpose? Did they come for healing? They came to test him. They came to test him. Now, by the way, I want to ask you this. Why did they come to Jesus to test him? The actual Greek word there is a very interesting one, too. It could be translated to tempt him as well. Okay? They did this, well, probably a couple of reasons. Number one, they saw the crowds going after him. And the crowds were taking away their popularity. So it became that type of thing. The other thing was, they also believed that Jesus was blasphemous. They rejected him as the very Son of God. And so they wanted to attack that. There were a lot of things that went into this. But what they did here was fascinating, and they said to him, now, if you think about it, where in the heck did they come up with this thing? Saying to him, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for just any reason? Where did they get that from? Where did that come from? It just seems like it was out of the blue, as it were. But, you know, and we'll never know for sure why that came. But could there have been some other references or some other dispute? Maybe they had a case, you know, that we don't know about of a divorce or something of that reason coming up. But they just asked this question here, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for just any reason? Well, by the way, did you think they knew the answer? Yeah, they knew the answer, right? They're being smart Alex, right? And so they're trying to test Jesus. For just any reason, did divorce exist? Yes. For just any reason, what do you think the answer would be? Well, they knew you just can't divorce somebody for no reason. So, does he answer this? Jesus is interesting. He never gives a direct answer to something, does he? But he does give a direct answer. He answered them and said to them, he turns it around and asks them a question. You got it like this. Have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female? Now, where does that direct us? It directs us, he, meaning God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. All right? By the way, gender issues are huge. Do not minimize gender issues. They're huge. They're you know, okay, I feel like a little Dutch boy with my finger in a dike. They're huge because we have same-sex marriage now. Do you remember Proposition 8, 10, 12 years ago? Strange bedfellows. You know who was fighting with us was the Mormons. The Mormons were cozying up to us. Do you remember that? Yeah, very interesting. You know, I told you those stories about the Mormons. Remember when the Mormons started coming to church here about 10 years ago or so when I did the radio show and all that stuff? They started cozying up to me, okay? Still bump into them. By the way, we helped one of them whose house burned. And I pray for him. I pray for his salvation. Yeah. Ministry to Mormons is a very interesting one, okay? And I just think about that. But they cozied up with us on that Prop 8. So we have that. But gender issues are huge. We know that in most American Protestant denominations, gender issues have gone, well, the gender teaching has gone by the wayside. And it went by the wayside with the ordination of women into the ministry. Right? And you name all those denominations, okay? There's one that claims to be Lutheran, okay? And you look at that, and people saw that as kind of benign, you know? There wasn't any big thing. But you saw the avalanche, the domino effect and all of that too, where now they haven't stopped with that, but the bishop of the Southern California ELCA is Guy Irwin, and he is a gay fellow, okay? And he married another man. So you see this kind of thing permeating mainline churches, Episcopal, Presbyterian, you know. Now Methodist officially, by the way, I was mentioning this the other day, I think the coronavirus put off that convention last summer in the Methodist church where they were going to have that big divorce. Remember that? And I lost track of that, you know. Last year was a blur. This year's a blur. But I got to track that, see whatever happened with that. But at any rate, Jesus says, have you not read? Now when he says read, this is interesting. I talk about reading the Bible. And this is New Year, people are reading the Bible, but where would we read that? Jesus would have read that in the scrolls of Genesis. Because in Genesis, we have an indication of marriage. And he's quoting Genesis 1:27 and 2:24. Quoting from that, he made them at the beginning. That is a reference to the beginning of all things. And how did he make them? Binary. Male and female. All right? And the actual Greek word is katesis, which means to create. He made them Arsane and Thulu, which means male and female. Those are two definite nouns in the Greek. And it's male and female that he created them as such. So we know this theologically, we know it physiologically, that God has created a binary system, right? With chromosomes, XX and XY, and that's how he's created us. That's how he's made us. Is there a disordering of this? Yeah, I don't deny that, okay? I don't deny any of this, okay? But all of God's creation is disordered, do you know that? Yeah, it's all disordered by sin. But anyway, that's not how he, made them. I had this discussion, I think I told you several months ago, of a lady here in town who will not come to our church and who refuses to. This great conversations with her. I've actually ministered to her mother. But she told me because of our view on homosexuality. And she just will not accept it, And, she just said that, people were created this way. They were born this way. I said, it doesn't fit with the Bible. It doesn't fit with the Bible. So she didn't want to hear about this. Because biblical authority doesn't matter, you know that? Biblical authority does not matter. And so I was trying to point out to her, because she still professes to believe in Jesus. And how Jesus was kind and Jesus was accepting. And I said, well, you're getting that view of Jesus from what? Well, from the Bible. Okay, by the way, which, there's sometimes he was very accepting, very kind, very merciful, but other times he wasn't either. So biblical authority is very important too. And I think, if you look at that, you're going to deduce this, that God made them male and female. That's a direct reference to Adam and Eve in creation, and said. Now, this is interesting because God actually said some words. So you have the physical creation, male and female, you have the genitals, you have the chromosomes and things of this nature. But then God also said something. And what did God say? For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Now again, you have the binary aspect there of a man leaving his father and his mother, all right, and being joined to his wife. So you have this leaving from the male and female, and then a cleaving and being joined to the wife. And I think that being joined can be seen in different senses, can't it? It can be seen physically with the sexual reproduction of a joining together, but I think it can also be seen in the vows, that they've joined themselves by their vows, okay? And I think there's a wide way of looking at that, but ultimately it comes down to the physical act of procreation, because it says the two shall become what? One flesh. So there's a unity there, right? So does Jesus answer their question? He doesn't answer their question. I went to Bible class and I didn't get an answer. No, he didn't answer their question, did he? So what he does, it's like today too. So I thought about this too. When people confront you and they have these objections to what we believe, what we confess as Christians, don't answer their question. You can later, but don't bite on that. Just take a deep breath. Go back and lay down some suppositional things first. So, like in this conversation with this lady, the approach LASSE, listen, ask, seek, share, invite, encourage, that we learned in our evangelism training. Never forget that. So I listened to her and let her say all these things. I kind of knew it was coming, okay? I was polite, I just listened to it. By the way, when you listen to people, you got to listen to a lot of baloney. Do you know that? There's a lot of phony baloney, right? Heretical, contrary to Scripture, nonsensical. And it's just, okay, I'm sitting there, I'm listening, but I'm praying at the same time and saying, keep your mouth shut, pray for her, be kind, right? Let her spout all this stuff, okay? Let her get it out, okay? That's an important point in evangelism and outreach. Let people spew all this nonsense, okay? What it teaches you is to discipline yourself to sit there quietly and listen to it, all right? That's hard to do, okay? It's very hard. It's very difficult because our tendency is to do what? Let both barrels go and come back at it, okay? But, it's not a bad thing because Jesus did this. Then you ask those questions and you clarify this, and then you share the gospel. So at any rate, with this test, see, Jesus, the interesting thing about Jesus, he didn't get trapped by these people. he used some good tactics. So in this question of divorce, he didn't answer their questions, but he lays down God's intent for marriage. And what is God's intent for marriage? Very clear in the scripture, right? Okay. Lifelong, it's monogamous, and gender is an essential feature of God's order. Gender is an essential feature. It's not optional. It's not chosen by you. You do not choose to identify with a certain gender. But if you look at most forms, legal forms now, you've given that option, right?
Yeah.
You can choose your own identity.
Yep.
You can choose your own identity. And this is, don't think this is outside the church. This is inside the church. This is in every congregation. It's an issue that's confronting pastors left and right, okay? You haven't seen anything yet, okay? It's just, it's coming, and it's coming full on. It's in our schools. Your young people are being indoctrinated in the higher education centers of the left. And this is going all across the board in so many ways too. But gender is extremely important. And I think, by the way, in this struggle for the heart and soul of America right now, what we're seeing too, this is going to be one of the big, it is one of the issues. You know how many issues there are out there right now? Oh my goodness. I was like, wait a second, you know what? So that little clip when there's like, you scratch your head, right? So how many issues are there right now? Well, I've told people this, in normal times, whatever normal times are, life is tough enough, isn't it? But now you throw all this other stuff on, and it's almost overwhelming, isn't it? It's almost overwhelming many times for people today. But you throw in the complexities of these things. So anyway, he quotes that, gender is an essential feature, God is joined together. Let me ask you this question, is marriage a divine institution? Yes, it was instituted by God in the garden. It wasn't man's idea, was it? It was God's idea. And so marriage is instituted by God, sanctified by God, blessed by God. That's why we want our marriages blessed in a church service, okay? I tell people a marriage is a worship service, all right? I think, this is interesting, but a lot of pastors have had real struggles over this, where couples want to come in and turn it into a secular service in God's house. And we have standards, we have guidelines for all this too. By the way, this exists with funerals too, by the way. So every church, every pastor really needs to have guidelines. Put them on your website, lay it down there.
I was doing some checking on this, and I haven't got the facts down solidly yet. But as far as I can determine right now, up until the early 20th century, all marriages were done in a religious way. There was no marriage license.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't any. There were sometimes contracts drawn together between two people because they wanted to clarify certain things. But there was such a thing as a marriage license.
Right.
Until in the 20th century.
Yeah, and that was probably regulated by the state, probably for financial reasons would be my guess, as benefits and things of that nature.
If you go back for thousands of years, all marriages were done by the religious.
By the church.
Part.
You went to the priest, you went to the church.
Now, for the last 100 years, now people are more concerned about the legal part.
Yeah.
Tax purposes.
Well, and I'll tell you quite frankly, it comes down to money, the love of money, and the financial benefits of all these things then too, is what it comes down to. And that's what happened with Proposition 8, gay marriage. It became a financial issue. I'm convinced, this is my opinion again too. Again, I shouldn't give opinions. I guess I can, free country. But you take it for what it is, okay? That's all I'm saying, okay? But I think a lot of the battle we're going through in America right now is going to come down to money too. I really do. It's going to come down to money. It's going to come down to the dollar, okay? And money makes the world go round. The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And you're going to see a lot of that, kicking in when you see these movements come in. Because if you look at Marxism, look at socialism, money is right at the heart and core of it, isn't it, Paul?
Well, getting back to what Pastor was saying about a secular marriage and a marriage within the church. If a married couple from a secular marriage, would it be sinful in God's eyes for them to divorce because they're not really married in God's eye to begin with? Would that be true?
So this is an interesting thing now where marriage is instituted by God, but yet we look at it being regulated by the state, by government, and even in Judaism it was regulated by customs, by certain things. So Mary and Joseph, for example, even though they were considered to be married, they had not consummated their marriage yet. Right? So that was kind of a customary thing. So your question is, if I hear this correctly, is if a couple has a civil marriage and only has a civil license, if they were to divorce, would God consider them to be divorced then? Would that be a sin? And my answer would be yes. It would still be a sin because even though that marriage was still done according to God's institution, right? Even though it wasn't, there's nothing in the Bible that says you have to go to the church or that it has to be done by a priest or a pastor or something like that.
Yeah, but the priest would consecrate it like he would.
It's a blessing. And now, this is interesting. I tell people this. Who signs your marriage license when you're married in the church? I sign a legal document. And by the way, I messed up my daughters 5 years ago. I did. Oh, they are so sticky, okay? I started writing in the wrong box, and I took some white out. Pater Picati, please forgive me. Never use whiteout. My wife told me I was stupid. She said, you know better than to use whiteout on a legal form. Rejected. Like my own daughters. I started writing in haste. Okay, maybe I was a little nervous or something like that. Anyway, I had to reissue it and took care of it. But the pastor nonetheless signs it, Paul. It's a legal document. So my point is, I'm acting as an agent of the state. Okay? So I would say yes, if that couple were not Christians, then your question really is this. If a couple is not a Christian, is it still a sin if they were to divorce without proper grounds? And the answer is yes, because God doesn't distinguish that type of thing. This application of Genesis applies to all people, not just Christians.
Well, everything would be sin if it's not done in faith.
Yeah, so my point is, I would still tell that couple that yes, by the way, if an unbeliever commits adultery, is it still adultery? Yes. If they commit murder, it's still murder, but they're not Christians, so they don't have the same understanding of it. It's the first use of the law as a curb, but the second use of the law is to show us our sin, so it's a different distinction in that, but yes, essentially I would say it's still a sin and not pleasing in God's sight. Aaron?
What if you're in a marriage where you want to remain married, but your partner wants a divorce and makes you sign a divorce agreement? Are you free to marry somebody else?
So that would be a case of malicious desertion then, I would assume, and we'll cover that. You can actually read that in the Sixth Commandment. In the Catechism too, where they talk about this malicious desertion in 1 Corinthians 7, where it says the one that wishes to depart and leave, that they're not bound.
Yeah.
That would be a malicious desertion in that sense, so you would not be bound. So, by the way, Reader's Digest here, there's two biblical reasons then for a legitimate scriptural divorce. Could be adultery and then malicious desertion, where this party just says, I'm out of here, I'm done, So we'll talk about some implications of this. By the way, so here, we're talking about gender issues. This is big too, okay? Just the world keeps going. But I got to tell you about the divorce issue and the marriage issue too, because that is a big effect. That has a big effect. It's huge. It's a big thing. And I was thinking about this, even childbearing. I was doing some genealogical work and going back to Abraham Jordan in Virginia in the 1800s. Abraham Jordan is my great-great-grandfather, had 11 children. He was fruitful and he multiplied. Now I suspect if you go through genealogies, and I know this is true because if you look at birth rates, right? But you go back and look at that too, and wow, these people had 10, 11 children. Didn't think anything of it. Farmers, yeah. Probably grew tobacco, probably politically incorrect in Virginia. I have no idea, okay? By the way, I think I told you on the Jordan side of my family, my dad was the first one not to join the Masonic Lodge. And we had some little brouhahas in the family over the Masons. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And as a kid, I didn't know anything about the Masons other than they wore white. I remember my great-grandfather's funeral. You ever been to a Masonic funeral?
Oh,
Yeah, they got the lambskin aprons, and I saw these guys marching in with big hats on and swords and leather aprons and going, I'd never seen that before, It's kind of, what's that all about? Well, they're Masons, okay? And then as I went to college, went to seminary, started learning more about their vows and what they believe. And I'm going, well, this stuff is godless. It's anti-Christian. It's horrible, you know? And I'm not trying to offend anybody here that might be a Mason, okay, or involved in that. But I remember, so my dad was very faithful in the Presbyterian church. And his pastor, back in the old days when most Presbyterians were still Christians, warned him about this, okay? By the way, my dad's pastor was a 5-point Calvinist, a true Calvinist, okay? You don't meet too many of those. And just said, you can't do this because they make, blasphemous vows, and they believe in works righteousness, okay? The great grand architect of the universe will welcome you into the celestial. It's all works righteousness. It's all works righteousness. That's all it is. So a Christian cannot accept these teachings, okay? My dad didn't do it. And we had these brouhahas because when my grandpa died, my grandfather was not attending a church or anything. I'm not even sure if he was a Christian, to be honest with you. But the Presbyterian pastor acquiesced to do it, but would not allow the Masons, to his credit, to come in there. And my grandma blew a fuse. She was really upset. I remember this, okay? And I didn't understand. I mean, I was a kid at the time. I didn't really understand all the issues. But now I begin to understand some issues when people have gotten mad at me who wanted lodges to participate in funerals and do things like this. And I've told them this, and I've tried to explain this. And in seminary, I took a whole class on cults and sects, and part of it was the lodges. And I did a project on the Masonic Lodge. I was just intrigued by this. And I watched John Ankerberg a lot. You ever follow John Ankerberg? He was on TV down in Southern California. But he did a lot with the cults and sects. Walter Martin did a lot of this stuff. When you get into this, you say, this is something a Christian, okay, it's called Christians and their affiliations, okay? Now, it's not wrong for a Christian to affiliate with a group or even a lodge. If you want to join the Beaver Lodge, or you know what I'm saying, a fishing club or whatever, clubs, Subaru car club, do you take religious vows and things like that, okay?
You can't enter unless you try.
My point is, your affiliations, by your vow, by your oath of office, if you go to a place that's called a Masonic temple, it's a religious place, right? And you're affiliating with that. You made a vow. And I would talk to these Masons, talk to my old uncle there too. He says, wow, you know a lot about this. Because a lot of them don't have a clue. They just don't have a clue. Okay? There's a great book written by Pastor Acker, A-C-K-E-R, the LCMS, called Strange Altars. Great book that was floating around for years. This is something in the church we don't talk about much anymore either. Remember the old issues, the lodge issue? In your Constitution bylaw had to have a lodge clause. You couldn't allow lodge members into the church. Caused all kinds of heartache and grief. But here's the issue, that all the lodges are dying now. You know that? Do you know that almost every volunteer organization is dying or dead? They've all turned gray and old. Because people don't join lodges anymore. They don't join Rotary Club, they don't join Kiwanis, they don't join, you name these groups, they just don't do it anymore. Okay, you go to Enloe Hospital, all the volunteers are little gray-haired ladies. Yeah, people aren't going to do this stuff anymore, okay? So, that type of thing. The interesting thing here, when we go back to this, of God joining people together, God indicates in verse 6, says they're no longer two, but one flesh. There's a unity. You see that thing, flesh, occurring there too? That's the physical aspect. They're no longer two, but one flesh. He doesn't say they're one in spirit or one in mind, but he actually says they're one, and you should underline that. They're one flesh. I think that's fascinating that he actually uses that word. Sarx, which is the Greek word, it's the physical aspect of it. And I think that's interesting when Jesus talked elsewhere about a man leaving his father and mother and cleaving to his wife, which means to cling, that physical aspect. Yeah, they become one. So they are no longer duo, two, but they are one flesh. And that's how God sees them, in a unity. And that unity, by the way, when it comes to divorce, that divorce still breaks the marriage, okay? No matter what, even if it's a scriptural divorce. Let me tell you this, okay? Well, I think that person was perfectly right to divorce him or her. It's still a sin and it still affects them, right? It's a horrific thing. I've talked to so many people who, they were not the guilty party, okay? But they're scarred for life. They bear that stigma the rest of their life. And sometimes pastors will try to comfort people and say, well, but you weren't the guilty one, your philandering husband and everything. But that doesn't help them. It doesn't help them at all. Because they still have the stigma. And I know for Christians too. I've had this issue come up where a Christian has been divorced for a long, long time. And they've asked me this, do I have to keep referring to myself as divorced? Or can I say I'm single? because there's a stigma with that, you know. And so all of that comes to be. So you see God's plan here of what he's done. And it says, now this is always read after the couple is pronounced husband and wife. Therefore, what God has joined together, let not man separate. And so God joins them together, and man is not to separate. Okay, is that the answer to their question? Yeah. Divorce was, common back then as well. It's not a cultural institution, can't be changed. The Lutheran Study Bible, by the way, on page 1911, has a little treatment of same-sex marriage. And our catechism also has that as well. I will tell you this, that this is the first catechism that dealt with the topic of same-sex marriage. Yeah. So, did you learn about that in your catechism classes, most of you, same-sex marriage? What was it? No, but if you go to the Sixth Commandment, this little catechism is just outstanding, 2017 version. Just go through it, pour through these things. But definitely, the Sixth Commandment, it explicates all these things here. And it talks about the rape and the incest, the sexual child abuse, the other sexual assaults. Okay, that's a whole ministry in and of itself too. The whole issue of dealing with pornography and sexual addictions and human trafficking and things of this nature. All of that is definitely dealt with in the scriptures. Anyway, they deal with all of that. The other thing they deal with in here in the Sixth Commandment too is this gender dysphoria, which, gender confusion, as it were. They deal with cohabitation as well, unmarried couples living together, practicing their sexuality. And so they get into some big things here, but question 76 is the one, the same-sex marriage, and how God created man and woman to complement one another. Same-sex marriage rejects God's intention, Romans chapter 1. Okay? And then it deals with the issue of people who are confused about their sexual identity in adolescence, whether they feel attracted to the opposite sex or not. And I'm going to tell you this, what's happened in our world today now is really, we're going to see even more harm now, okay? Because it's just accepted and allowed for. And young adolescents who can read the Bible, who have God's Word, but the power of the culture and the world takes them the other way. Yeah. And so it has some good things in here too, that you should read this and help, people. The other thing, the other issue of the church too, is the whole aspect of singleness, okay? And that's kind of and I've had people in the church tell me this too sometimes, that they don't feel welcomed or feel a part of the church because everything's geared around couples, right? We have a couples club, or we have this and that, okay? And sometimes people who are single have a difficult time in the church. And you can kind of understand that, right? Where do they fit? How do they, deal with all this, just from a sociological point of view or whatever it might be? And so some of these challenges are definitely there. Even their sense of calling, are they inadequate because they're single and never married? Is their desire to marry? And then how do they do that to find a Christian spouse? Most young people now who are looking to be married are going online, most Christians, almost to a T, right? They're not going to church to find somebody, because there ain't anybody in the church, pretty much, okay? But they're going online. Isn't that true? Mm-hmm. If they're a young person looking for a spouse now, pretty much going online. Christian Mingle, what are some of the other ones? There's these sites out there, there's actually a Lutheran singles site out there too, I think, okay? But, and so that's an interesting one. This is interesting how the internet can be used. And I'm not saying this is bad, by the way. In fact, I would, counter that and say I know some young couples who have met each other online, and specifically Christians, and reached out and established that relationship. I was going to say something else. I just heard one the other day of a couple who were classmates in high school and went on classmates.com and ended up marrying. So, I don't know what your experiences are with online dating or things like that. Do any of you have any experiences like this? Or, things going on.
A buddy of mine signed me up last
Yeah?
night. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Did he put a nice picture of you up there?
No, I'm gonna do that.
Okay, it's gonna be flattering. So it's auditioning. It's auditioning, right, Aaron? Yeah, it's all about that. Yeah, it's auditioning. It's all about how it looks. Okay. So so I don't know. I haven't watched the news this week, but if you watch Channel 7, you'll have to watch it. But I saw Jerry O'Lennon the other day. And he's growing a beard, and I said, "What are you growing a beard for?" I said, "You don't look good with a beard." He says, "I can't even grow a beard." He says, "It's my turkey neck. It doesn't look good on camera, And I said, "Well, you don't even do the anchoring anymore, because that's all about looks. You know that? These TV shows, it's all about looks and appearance, okay? That's all it's about, ratings." I said, "You're just a reporter. Put some big scarf around your neck or whatever." He said, "No, I'm going to try the beard and cover my turkey neck, And anyway, that's what he wants to do now. All right, let me go on here. So does God want couples to separate? Well, I think that's the answer to the question is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for just any reason? And his answer is not for any reason, right? There is no reason for a divorce, is there, biblically? Okay, now hang on, because somebody's going to go, well, wait, you just told us there were two. No, because even that is a sin. Even that is a breach of the unity.
Yeah.
So even if you have valid reasons, it's still not God's will, is it?
No.
It's still not God's will. God wants you to be faithful until death parts us. Yeah. You know what? I don't know when you made your marriage vows, how you felt about that. Maybe you were young and in love and all that, I'm kind of convinced of a lot of these things that we don't understand most vows until we actually live them. I mean, were you dumb and stupid when you got married? Were you in love? Were you all goo-goo-eyed? Did you understand this? I mean, I'm not questioning anybody's sincerity, but I think, isn't it true that for most of our vows, we just don't... That's a great day. You're sky high, right? And I thought about that, this young couple. And I've always tried to mention this in sermons, say, wait a second, do you understand this? Until death parts us? By the way, that phrase will only come into play when you go to the funeral of your spouse. Do you know that? Otherwise, it means nothing. But when you go to the funeral of your spouse, until death parts us, all of a sudden, oh, that's what I meant, right?
Yeah.
And then it kind of hits you, sickness and health, rich or poor, right? And all these things too. You think about this. I think the best marriage counseling we can give any couple is just take them to the rite of marriage. It's in Lutheran's service book, and I go through the vows with them, is what I do. And just go through it biblically and say, this is what we believe, and this is what you need to consider as you do this. By the way, I don't think premarital counseling does all that much good, because the couples have decided to marry anyway. Yeah, they pretty much have. But I think what we can at least do as Christians, as pastors, is to go through the Bible with them to affirm that, right? To affirm that and say, we're going to pray for you and help you along the way here too. Young people are struggling. Pastor Rollins?
I had one experience where that was not true. A couple, both of them belonged to my church in Davis. One was a college student working on her doctorate, and the other, the man in the case, was a high school graduate. And the differences were so extreme in these two people. I had to tell them, I think it would be a mistake for you to get married.
Yeah.
They didn't like it, but they didn't get married. And I said, I'm not forbidding you. If you want to get married, of course I'll do the service, no question about it. But I'm saying I don't think you have the kind of opportunity here that's going to make a good marriage. And at any rate, the story ended about 20 years later when I met her at an LWML. And she said that was the best advice you ever gave.
Yeah.
She was married, she had
Yeah.
3 children, she had a
Yeah.
wonderful husband, everything was working out beautifully.
Well, yeah, and for the pastor, he has to give his blessing to this too. And what if it goes against his conscience and he can't do it? And I know people get mad, they get upset. I have couples that come, they're living together, and I tell them, this is wrong, I can't bless this unless you separate, repent. And they get upset and they get mad, and things, all these things come in. Marriage counseling, marriage stuff is tough, it's sticky, it's messy business, let me tell you.
I think that's one of the hardest jobs any pastor has.
Yeah, I'm dealing with a couple right now, actually, and everything is, the tensions are high, the emotions are raw, and everything's going on here. Marriage is an interesting thing. It's one of the most intimate, most blessed things that has so much interaction. on a daily basis, 24/7, of everything you can imagine. You know, and it just, you know, it's a miracle any marriage survives. No, seriously, it's a miracle of God. It really is, okay? And I just tell people, that's what happens if your marriage survives and you remain committed to each other with love and forgiveness. It's because of your belief. It's the sanctity of marriage. Just like a child in the womb, you know, we should sanctify that too. And that's not easy either. But, you know, if you by the way,